Hello, good morning. Thank you for coming to see my talk. So today I'm going to tell you a tale about energy and our society, where we get our energy from now, some of the problems there might be with where we get that energy from, and then how we might right now start to move towards a situation where we rely more and more on renewable fuels for a sustainable energy future. So let's get this right out of the way to start. We rely absolutely on fossil fuels as a society. And this leads to several questions. Are these fuels running out? Does using fossil fuels lead to climate change? Are fossil fuels secure energy resources? And as the global population rises, and as the global population gets richer, are we going to continue powering our society using fossil fuels? So in order to look at this, we're going to introduce some numbers and just a few graphs. So what I'm showing you here is the number 400 quintillion. It is the number of joules per year that the human race currently consumes. In terms of power, this is the equally meaningless number of 13 terawatts. Or if you want something that you can relate to, it's around about 5 billion standard kettles filled up to the brim, constantly bubbling all the time. So this is an enormous amount of energy that we currently consume as a race. Where do we get this energy from? Well, as we said at the outset, we rely absolutely on fossil fuels. So it's not surprising to see that the vast majority of our energy consumption comes in the form of fossil fuels. Oil, coal, and natural gas account for more than 80% of the energy that we consume. Of the remaining 20%, around about half of that is biomass, and most of this biomass is what we call non-sustainable biomass. I go out, I chop down a tree, I burn the tree, and I don't bother to plant another one. We then have around about 9% composed of renewables and nuclear. So nuclear is about 5%, renewables 4%. Of that 4%, 2.5% are enormous vanity projects, such as hydroelectric dams, and only 1.5% are renewables like solar, wind, tidal, and so on. So renewables count for a tiny fraction, really, of the energy that we currently consume. Are there consequences to using so many fossil fuels? Well, yes. So fossil fuels come from the bodies of organisms that lived millions of years ago. They died, they were buried. The CO2, the carbon dioxide they took in during their lifetimes, was buried with them. When we dig them up and burn them, we release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere that was taken out millions of years ago. So when we burn fossil fuels, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases. And that's what this graph shows. So up the left-hand side, it shows us the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and on the bottom it shows us the year. So this is measured at Mauna Loa in Hawaii, and they've been measuring the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere since the late 50s. And as you can see, since the late 50s until now, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased to around about 25%. To put some context on this, this is the highest level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the last 400,000 years. So this is long before Homo sapiens, our species, ever walked the Earth. So we really don't know what it was like the last time atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide were this high, because we weren't there. Now, carbon dioxide absorbs energy from the sun and then radiates it. It produces what's called a greenhouse effect. So we need the greenhouse effect. If we had no carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere, the average Earth's temperature would be around about -18 Celsius, so it would be too cold to live on. So we need some carbon dioxide to keep the Earth warm enough to live in and on. However, carbon dioxide is like the dial on the thermostat in your house. If you move that a little bit, then your house gets much hotter. And that's the same with carbon dioxide. A slight increase can produce a large increase in temperature. And that's what this graph shows. It shows the average temperature of the world over the last 100 years or so. So what we want to home in on here is since 1950, the Earth's temperature has risen at a pretty constant rate, whereas before that it was roughly flat with a lot of undulation. So the Earth is getting hotter, and more than that, it's getting hotter at an ever-increasing rate. And the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere tallies with this increasing temperature. So it seems that burning fossil fuels lead to temperature rise. So this is the hottest we've been for 200,000 years. So again, we weren't really around to write down what it was like back then. So an often quoted argument is that we don't really need to worry about burning fossil fuels. They're running out, so they'll run out soon enough, and then we'll have to use something else. We don't need to change our behaviour. So we've been told for as long as we've been around that we have 25 years worth of oil, that we've reached peak oil, and we're going to run out, and we don't need to worry that the fact that there is oil around will tempt us into burning it. This is a dangerous fallacy. So we can see this with some more numbers. So we have somewhere around 1,700 trillion barrels of crude oil that we know exist. This is around about 100 years of supply at current rates of burning. But I don't want you to focus on the number of years of supply we have, but more the graph that shows you up the side how many billion barrels of oil we know we have in the world versus the year. So if you go back to 1980, we had around about 600 or 700 billion barrels of oil that we knew existed. Since 1980, we've been burning oil like there's no tomorrow. And yet now, as I stand here, we have between 2 and 3 more times oil available to us, still in the ground, than we ever had back in 1980. The reason is, the more we look for oil, the more we find. So we just get better and better at finding oil. The same is true with natural gas. Somewhere around 7,000 trillion cubic feet of natural gas are available to us now. Again, this is 2 or 3 times more than we had back in 1980, even though we've been burning oil and gas like no tomorrow ever since. Coal is in some ways the elephant in the room. We have 11 trillion tons of coal as the human race, and this is somewhere between 1 and 2 millennia of supply of coal. Or if we just stopped using all other energy sources and just burn coal, we'd have at least 500 years worth of coal. So the take-home message here is that we're not running out of fossil fuels. Quite the opposite, we're finding more fossil fuels. And so we have plenty of fossil fuels to continue powering ourselves for hundreds of years to come, if we so choose. Now, the world's population is rising. People in the developing world in particular are getting richer. They're heating their homes, they're watching television at night. Global energy consumption is rising. It's probably going to double between now and 2050. So in that context, we have to ask, who is for business as usual? Are we going to continue powering our society from fossil fuels with all the problems that they might bring? So what are our options if we don't want to use fossil fuels? Well, we could think about nuclear. So nuclear is an option, but if we want to use nuclear, then we would have to build new nuclear power stations at an ever-increasing rate. So we would probably have to build 1 new nuclear power station every day for the next 40 years in order to power our society solely from nuclear. The bad news is, apart from the cost, is that we would have run out of fissile material to put in the nuclear reactors long before we ever finished building them. So nuclear is only ever going to be a niche solution to this problem. The other things we might consider are biofuels and renewables, of course. So biofuels have a part to play, but on their own they cannot solve our energy problems. So we could maybe get around about 10% of our total energy needs if we really optimize the way that we grew and used biofuels. Biofuels, however, have the problem that if you're growing a crop to burn, you can't use that same land to grow a crop for food, and if the global population is rising, that could be a big problem. This then leaves renewables. So we have wind, tidal, hydro, geothermal. So we could make a good dent in that 13 terawatts, or the increase that we would need in that 13 terawatts, by using these energy sources. So I've given you here some estimates as to how much we might be able to extract from these sources in the coming years. However, the biggest source of renewable energy that we have is solar, 100,000 terawatts. So one statistic that is very interesting is that more energy hits the Earth's surface in the form of sunlight in 1 hour than the human race uses in an entire year. So we have an enormous abundance of solar power that is reasonably well distributed across the Earth's surface. So even in Scotland, trees grow and plants flower. One of the issues with all renewables, solar, wind, wave, tidal, etc., is that they create electricity. And electricity needs to be used as it's generated or it's lost, so it's use it or lose it. However, as this pie chart shows how we consume energy, not how we necessarily generate it, but how we use it as a society. And you can see that even in the developed world, this segment of the pie that I've pulled out is what we consume as electricity, and that's only 20%, and even in the developing world, it's even less. We use most of our energy as fuel: oil, gas, coal, biomass. So we need to think about powering ourselves using fuels rather than electricity, unless we're going to change how we live our lives. So we need to take this renewable energy and we need to store it somehow so that we can use it for later, just as a fuel is a store of energy. So storage is the key problem with the use of renewables. So when we talk about storing energy, one of the first things you might think of are batteries. Did anyone here drive today in an electric car? Shout out. So one of the big problems with electric cars is what's called range anxiety. I buy my car, I get it in the morning, I leave my house, and I'm panicking by the time I get to the end of the road because I just don't know if I'm going to get to my destination. The reason for that is that the battery that powers the car is very big and very heavy for the amount of energy that it stores. And we can see this on a graph of energy density. So at the side we see amount of energy stored for something's physical size. And on the bottom, we see amount of energy stored for something's physical mass. And as we can see, batteries are right down in the bottom left-hand corner. They're really big and really heavy for the amount of energy that they store. Now, I'm guessing that a lot more of you came today using some sort of fossil fuel-powered transport, maybe a diesel car or a diesel bus. And that's because diesel is up towards the upper right-hand side of this graph. It's a great fuel to use. It's quite light, and it's quite small for the amount of energy that it packs. That's why we power our society with them, because they're useful. So what we want to do is we want to get to a situation where we can store renewable energy, not in batteries, but in a fuel that is small and energy dense that we can carry around with us. And I'm showing you two examples on this graph of things that might make sensible, sustainable fuels: hydrogen and methanol. So, here's one way that we can consider getting to this future. We take water, of which there is an abundance on the planet, and we use renewable energy, maybe from solar, maybe from somewhere else, and electrical energy input to electrolyze this, to break the water apart into hydrogen and oxygen. We can vent the oxygen to the atmosphere, we store the hydrogen in a tank. Later on, when we want our energy back out, we take that hydrogen and oxygen from the atmosphere and we react them in a fuel cell. This regenerates the water that we originally used and spits out the energy that we originally stored. So we have a completely carbon neutral cycle for storing renewable energy in the form of an energy-dense fuel that is sensible and useful to carry around with us. If we don't want to make hydrogen, because it is after all a gas and maybe hard to handle, we could think about doing what plants do, but in an industrial, artificial way. It's called artificial photosynthesis. We could take CO2 from the atmosphere and the hydrogen we got from water and react them with known chemical processes to make liquid fuels, things like methanol, that we can carry around very easily just in a can and use in a car just as we would do at the moment. So the science is already there to do that. The question remains, what can you do to help? Well, the first thing you should probably do is stop driving your fossil fuel powered car. You could drive an electric vehicle. Okay, it's not very efficient, but it's better for the environment than a petrol-powered car. The other thing you could think about doing is buying a hydrogen-powered car. So these things exist, and there are fuel stations for these hydrogen-powered cars. There's one in Aberdeen, there's one at Heathrow Airport. I don't quite know how you'd get between the two. But in California, there is a whole network of hydrogen refueling stations. So you could, if you lived in California, drive around California perfectly sensibly in a hydrogen-powered car. And remember, this doesn't produce any CO2, it just makes water. So you could put your hand in your pocket and buy a hydrogen-powered car. The other thing you can do is use your vote. So you can vote for policies that will encourage sustainability and that will punish the use of fossil fuels. So this might hurt you in the short term, but in the long term it's going to be to our benefit. The other thing you can do is vote for policies that are going to encourage scientists and engineers and give them the resource they need to take these nascent chemical technologies and make them a practical reality that we can all rely on. So I'm just going to leave you with that thought that you can make a big difference if you vote the right way and if you put your hand in your wallet. And just one final thing to dwell on, I will say that the problem is serious, but if we can all keep calm and love hydrogen, then we'll get there. Thank you very much.